if you do not find moments of joy, you will burn out before you know it. And I think that joy and resistance has to be at the center because joy is an act of resistance.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for this edition of the One Young World Together Apart series. My name is Simon Rogers, and I'm a long-time One Young World ambassador. I think I attended my first summit in 2012 in Pittsburgh, and now I'm the organisation's people director. Today, we're joined by the awe-inspiring Ashlee Marie Preston, who is an acclaimed media personality, cultural commentator, social impact strategist, political analyst, and civil rights activist. She's historically the first trans person in the US to become editor-in-chief of a national publication and the first openly trans person to run for state office in California. Her awards and accolades are simply too many to cover in our short time. So thank you, Ashlee, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So I've got loads of questions that I'd love to ask. I'm always in awe of your work and everything that you do. So I'm going to dive right in. And I just wanted to consider that we're living through uncertain and challenging times at the moment. So do you have any advice for young people so that they can look beyond surviving and continue dreaming and creating change despite the limitations they might face?
Unlock your imagination. I think I remember when I was an up and coming young activist, and I had a great deal of mentors in my life who had an effective model as to how they affected change. And I always remember thinking, I love that idea, but I would maybe do it this way, or these are the tweaks that I would apply. And so sometimes we get so set in our ways that we don't understand that the way that we do the work has to evolve at the same rate or pace as the evolution of the social ecology that we're living within. So I would definitely say unlock your imagination as to what you can contribute and how you contribute to the movement.
I love that. And I guess thinking of movements, one, I wonder in your words, what you think more could be done for trans visibility in the Black Lives Matter movement to integrate empathy for and prioritise trans lives within that movement?
We always say knowledge is power, but I believe history is powerful. Understanding that there has never been a separation of these movements historically, but they've worked in concert with one another. I know even when we look at the Black Lives Matter movement, two of the three founders of the Black Lives Matter movement are queer women. So it goes without saying that I think for many of us who have intersectional identities, which really quick, I don't want to drop that off and just move past it. Intersectionality describes multiple threats of discrimination when an individual's identity overlaps with multiple marginalized groups. So many of us aren't just Black, we aren't just trans, we aren't just women, but we have multiple layers to our identity that places us in various movements.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned the intersectionality, and I was reading your piece in Harper's Bazaar in which you examined trans misogynoir. And in that you suggested that when Black trans women are liberated, all of us will be, but not until then. So I guess, firstly, for people that don't or haven't heard that term before, could you explain trans misogynoir and what do you believe is the best antidote to injustice?
Sure. Or trans misogynoir describes my experience at the intersections of race, gender, socioeconomic disparity, so many different variables. And so, again, just understanding that identity markers don't exist independently of one another, but each informs the other. So again, I can't have a separate experience within Blackness or transness without having all of those challenges happen simultaneously. And so I think ultimately when I say that when Black trans women are liberated, all of us will be, again, it goes back to understanding that those of us who have the most challenges within these systems are the ones who can unlock the way that we see these systems, right? And so liberation looks like housing. It looks like employment opportunities. It looks like access to healthcare. It looks like access to social support. It looks like being able to take up space in society without having the fear that your person will endure harm because of who you are. And so I think, again, if we can be, radical enough in our imagination, which really isn't so radical, but like to imagine what it would look like if everybody had a seat at the table, then we can obviously start to positively impact other communities. So it's more so of a bottom up approach than doing top down, because top down approaches to social justice don't afford us the opportunity to actually catch some of the benefits of that movement work as it trickles down.
Yeah, and I guess one of the points in there is the quite the opposite to the accesses that you've described around privilege. So how can we make, or how do you think we can make people confront privilege who may be unaware of its existence in their own experience, so that we don't just speak to an echo chamber?
Well, I think privilege isn't a dirty word. I think a lot of times these days people see privilege as an insult, or they see privilege as a denial or invalidation or delegitimization of their experiences. And so when we're talking about privilege, we're really asking you to examine what opportunities you have to support those who are disproportionately impacted by the experiences that you have. So being able to show up to a job without my gender being a factor, being able to access shelter if I need to, without being turned away because their definition of womanhood isn't in alignment with mine, being able to, again, have the same resources that set me up to thrive.
And I think you touched on a couple of your own experiences there. And I think one of the things that I've read in one of your pieces was around violence and violence towards trans people. So I'm interested to know what can be done to stop or to call attention to the normalization of violence against trans bodies.
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with media, how we're portrayed in media. I think that most people look at media as this entity that's outside of all of the social encounters that we have with one another, when in fact, media informs how we see one another, how we interact with one another. And so if you only see trans people as caricatures, if you only see trans people as as the victim in the first 3 minutes of a CSI episode, or if you only see trans people, within the sex industry or sex work or that kind of thing, which doesn't mean that they're less of a person if they choose to be in that space. I think, again, we need to be able to have a reimagination of how we show up in society. We are, sisters, brothers, we are sons, daughters, we are colleagues, we are lovers, we are friends, we are everything in society that you would see yourself as. And so I think, again, it takes having more conversations around the experiences that we have and understanding that we are not a spectacle. Our lives are not a form of entertainment. Understanding that we are not a monolith. We show up in various different ways. I've always said the best way to be an ally to someone is to ask, because it looks different for different people. And I think, again, when it comes to the violence, there has to be a priority on trans liberation. And I think what happens is that we're in a very unique position, because in the LGBTQ community, we have to encounter instances of racism and transphobia and sexism. In the feminist movement, sometimes we're not seen as women. When you go to the Black liberation movement, sometimes there's the challenge of, we're all Black, let's just focus on that. And there's a lack of understanding of intersectionality and the ways in which the other layers of our identity are impacted. So it's imagining, again, how to not allow ourselves to become intellectually lazy, but how do we zoom in and allow ourselves to make space for the very unique experiences of those who are still at the bottom of the societal totem pole.
And you make an interesting point there around allyship, and I think it's a subject that's talked about, and I'm going to turn that around. So you said if you want to be an ally, then you need to ask. So as a cis white gay man, how can I be an ally to you?
I would say the best way to be an ally, again, I talk about privilege. Even as a Black trans woman, I still have certain privileges. I'm less visibly trans than some of my peers, which means I'm able to navigate public space differently than those who aren't, or than someone who's non-binary. And I also obviously have a platform to speak from. And I know that that's not a given to most of the people who are experiencing the acts of violence that we see span across our screens, or that we see in the headlines of the publications that we read. So I'm going to speak from a place of the old me, the me that needed that kind of support 6-8 years ago. And I would say that it looks like, again, being able to make spaces wide enough to invite me in. So think about like your job, looking around the room and seeing where there's diversity lacking. It's opening up your faith-based communities for those who access those spaces. It is, friend groups. It is, any social setting that you find yourself in. I would challenge us all to look around that space and either see where we can invite more people in and make space for unique narratives, or how we can start to have those conversations with our friends. Because the truth is that it is not the responsibility of the oppressed class of person to dismantle a system that they didn't create. It is up to us, those of us who have privilege, just as much as it is for me as a Black trans woman in media, to say, hey, I know y'all want to talk about how fierce my hair is. I know y'all want to talk about the makeup and, what I wore on the red carpet, but here's the reality. Black trans women are being murdered at disproportionate rates. We know that there's an estimated life expectancy of only 35 years old. We know that even in the US under the current administration, there's all of these bureaucratic blockages that prevent us from thriving. And so, again, it's asking us, as I said in the beginning and in the opening, unlock our imagination as to how we can contribute to this. And I have so much faith and confidence in the upcoming leaders of tomorrow. I can't even say tomorrow, because they're today. They're leading today.
And I love that. And as an organisation, that's what One Young World is there for young leaders all around the world. And I think there's taking allyship to one side. There's then the kind of move to activism. Now, there's no formal route to activism, but what advice do you have as an activist for young people who want to make change but don't know how or where to start?
I think ultimately it goes back, this is like the most fun part again. It's consistent. It's unlocking your imagination as to how and what you can contribute. Because the truth is that these times are changing quickly, even so much so that when I started out in my own activism, social media wasn't a thing. I remember when MySpace happened and it was like mind blown. Like, you can connect to people all the way across the country. Before then it was like the AOL chat when I was like 16, and, we had a dial up, and like if your mother had to use the phone, then it would like log you off, and, that kind of stuff. So like looking at the innovation of social media, and for those of us who didn't start out using those resources, it may take us a second to get creative around how we use those platforms as tools of mobilization. However, the younger generation, they have their finger on the pulse of their own respective communities. So they know how to navigate these spaces with so much force and certainty and skill and expertise that some of us may not. And so I think that there is always a way to bring every aspect of who you are into the work. And that's important because this is a sprint, not a marathon. If you do not find moments of joy you will burn out before you know it. And I think that joy and resistance has to be at the center, because joy is an act of resistance. And I think that when you think about what oppression is and what it's meant to do, it's meant to shatter you from the inside out. And so you push back against that by finding a way to tap into joy and peace that is, as I would say, a peace that surpasses all understanding. And you do that by bringing every aspect of who you are into the space and recognizing that the way that we talk about these issues, we don't have to isolate them anymore.
And I love your point around joy, and I think in my own experience of my own bits of activism, taking a step back and finding joy in what you're doing is so important. It is a battle. It's always going to be a battle. But
no one told us that we could do that. No one told us. It's because we had this thought that liberation is a far off destination. Liberation is now. It's in the moment. It's the moments that you take time to love. It's the moments that you take time to learn. It's the moments that you take time to lean in and again, reimagine what the space could look like with you in it. And I think that again, liberation is in the present. And I think that that is the piece that the powers that be sometimes don't want us to know, is because we're supposed to find ourselves trapped on this hamster wheel and burning ourselves out. And I think, again, joy is also contagious.
Yes, absolutely. I'm certainly feeling that from you. Now, Ashlee, I'm afraid we're just out of time. My imagination has certainly been unlocked. So thank you so much for imparting so much knowledge, wisdom and experience on me and on many others. I'm certainly your ally. So please, let's give a big thank you to Ashlee for her time, and make sure to like, comment and share this session. Ashlee, thank you, and thank you all for watching.
Thanks for having me.